Those are my grandfather's accessible seats. Please move.
He probably won't even remember tomorrow.
Dad, you really need to see this. Where did you get that?
An arrogant stranger sat in the accessible seats I had bought for my 92-year-old grandfather at the biggest football match of his life. When I asked him to move, he looked at Grandpa's shaking hands and said, he probably won't even remember tomorrow. 5 minutes later, the man's teenage son opened a faded backpack and pulled out something that silenced our entire section. Before the final whistle, his father would lose the honor he had come to the stadium to receive, and my grandfather would be offered something no amount of money could buy. Hello, everyone. My name is Claire Bennett. I was 34 years old when this happened, and I lived just outside Baltimore, Maryland. The elderly man beside me that day was my grandfather, Jeremy Bennett, although everyone in our family simply called him Grandpa. Before I continue, please tell me where you are listening from. What city or country has this story reached? Leave a comment below, because I would truly love to know how far Grandpa's final whistle lesson has traveled. Grandpa had loved soccer for more than 80 years. He always called it football because that was what his father had called it, and nobody in our family ever tried to correct him. Every Saturday, he opened the curtains in his small living room, wrapped the same faded blue scarf around his neck, and lowered himself into a worn brown recliner beside the television. He kept the chair next to him empty. That chair had belonged to my grandmother, June. She had died 12 years earlier, but Grandpa still spoke to her during every match. June, that was never a penalty. June, our midfield is asleep again. June, I told you they would find a way. When I was a child, I thought this was funny. As I grew older, I understood that love sometimes survives by keeping its old routines. Grandpa had one sentence he repeated more than any other. He wrote it inside every birthday card he gave me. He said it whenever I failed an exam, lost a job, or thought my life was moving in the wrong direction. Never stopped believing until the final whistle. That spring, Grandpa turned 92. His mind was still sharp, but his heart was failing. A short staircase left him struggling for breath. Some mornings, his hands shook so badly that I had to fasten the buttons on his shirt. After one appointment, his cardiologist asked to speak with me in the hallway. She did not give me an exact amount of time. Doctors rarely do. She simply said, if there is something meaningful he has been postponing, do not assume you can do it next year. Those words stayed with me. 2 weeks later, Harbor City Football Club qualified for the national championship final. It was the biggest match in the club's history, and it would be played at our home stadium. Grandpa had supported Harbor City since the club's earliest amateur days. He had attended small matches in public parks when players changed clothes inside their cars, but he had never seen a championship final from inside the great stadium that now stood near the waterfront. Tickets went on sale at 10 on a Tuesday morning. I had my laptop open by 9:30. By 10:02, more than 40,000 people were ahead of me in the online line. I almost gave up. Then I heard Grandpa's voice in my head. Never stop believing until the final whistle. I waited for nearly 3 hours. When my turn finally arrived, almost everything was gone. 2 accessible seats remained on a platform near the field. They cost more than I had planned to spend. In fact, they cost almost everything in the savings account I had been building for a new car. I stared at the total for a long time. Then I remembered the doctor's warning, entered my card number, and clicked purchase. That evening, I carried my laptop to Grandpa's house. I need you to keep the first Saturday in May free, I told him. At my age, every Saturday is usually free. I turned the screen toward him. At first, he did not understand what he was seeing. Then he noticed the club crest, the words championship final, and our seat numbers. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. Claire, these are accessible seats near the field. Do you know what they cost? Unfortunately, I do. You should be saving for your future. You are part of my future. He began crying before the confirmation page had finished loading. For the next 2 months, Grandpa counted down the days like a child waiting for Christmas. He studied the team roster. He watched recordings of old matches. He even practiced walking from his bedroom to the mailbox because he wanted to be strong enough for the stadium. 3 days before the final, I found him standing in front of his hallway mirror wearing his blue scarf and team jacket. "What are you doing?" I asked, testing the uniform, and he turned sideways and nodded at his reflection. "Still championship quality?" On the morning of the match, I arrived before sunrise. Grandpa was already shaved and dressed. His jacket was carefully zipped, his shoes had been polished, and the faded scarf rested around his neck. Before we left, he removed an old photograph from the drawer beside his bed. It showed him and Grandma June outside a small stadium when they were newly married. Grandpa was tall and thin. Grandma wore a blue dress and held a paper ticket above her head. "We always promised we would attend a final together," he said. "But there were children, bills, and always another reason to wait." "She can still come with us," I said. Grandpa touched the photograph with one finger, placed it inside his wallet, and slipped the wallet into the inside pocket of his jacket. The drive into Baltimore took more than an hour because traffic surrounded the stadium. Grandpa did not complain once. He watched cars pass with blue flags hanging from their windows and waved whenever another supporter noticed his scarf. At the accessible entrance, a staff member offered him a wheelchair. Grandpa refused at first. "I brought my own legs," he said. Then he saw how far the tunnel stretched and quietly changed his mind. When we emerged from the tunnel, the stadium opened in front of us. The green field shone beneath the lights. Blue banners rolled down from the upper level. Thousands of voices joined in the same song. Grandpa became completely silent. I bent beside him and asked if he was all right. He nodded, but tears were already moving down his cheeks. "I thought it would be beautiful," he whispered. I did not know it would be this beautiful. Our seats were on an accessible platform above the corner of the field. There were no stairs, and the railing was low enough for Grandpa to see while seated. I helped him stand for a moment before the crowd became too busy. He took Grandma's photograph from his wallet and held it toward the pitch. "We finally made it, sweetheart." That should have been the beginning of the happiest afternoon of his life. Instead, a man's voice behind us said, "You're in the places we need." I turned around. He was in his late 40s, with silver at his temples and a dark jacket that looked more expensive than my car. A gold stadium credential hung around his neck. The card displayed the name Douglas Mercer beneath the logo of North Star Financial, one of Harbor City's major sponsors. His wife stood beside him. She looked uncomfortable before anyone had even spoken. Their teenage son carried a faded blue backpack with a broken zipper. Douglas checked our seat numbers. Then he looked toward 3 seats in the row behind us. "We'll take these 2, he announced. "Elaine and Brandon can use ours." For a second, I honestly thought he was joking. "Excuse me? These seats have a better view? I need to be visible when the camera passes this section. They also belong to us." Douglas gave me the patient smile of a man who believed everyone else existed to slow him down. "You have seats. We have seats. We are simply exchanging them." "No, we are not. My grandfather cannot manage the step to your row. I bought this accessible space specifically for him." Douglas finally looked at Grandpa. His eyes moved over the cane, the wheelchair, and the oxygen tube Grandpa sometimes used beneath his nose. He saw every reason those seats mattered. He simply did not care. The old man can sit anywhere, he said. At that age, the view hardly matters. I felt heat rise into my face. His name is Jeremy, and this match means more to him than you could possibly understand. Douglas shrugged. He probably won't even remember it tomorrow. The better view should go to someone who will. Grandpa's fingers tightened around the photograph in his lap. I looked at Douglas's wife. Elaine lowered her eyes. Then I looked at their son. Brandon appeared to be 15 or 16. The moment his father spoke, all the color disappeared from his face. Dad, he said quietly, those aren't our seats. Douglas did not even turn toward him. Stay out of this. I raised my hand toward a steward at the end of the section. Douglas saw me and stepped into Grandpa's place before the steward could arrive. I am a founding sponsor, he said. If you make a scene, the staff member you call will be the one who suffers for it. Then he sat down in the seat I had emptied my savings to buy. Elaine hesitated. Douglas patted the seat beside him, and she slowly sat without meeting my eyes. Brandon remained standing. I wanted to shout. I wanted every person in the section to hear exactly what this man had done. But Grandpa gently touched my wrist. It's all right, Claire. No, it isn't. We did not come here to argue. I can still hear the crowd from somewhere else. The excitement had disappeared from his voice. That hurt more than losing the seats. Douglas laughed beneath his breath. See, at least he understands. I will never forget those words. I took hold of Grandpa's wheelchair and began pushing him toward the aisle. His cane lay across his knees. Grandma's photograph was still in his hand. People nearby had started whispering, but nobody moved yet. I could feel their eyes following us. We had nearly reached the end of the platform when someone called, "Sir, please wait." It was Brandon. Douglas grabbed the boy's sleeve. Sit down. Brandon pulled free. He removed the faded backpack from his shoulders and opened the front pocket. His hands shook as he searched inside. For one confused moment, I wondered whether he was looking for his family's tickets. Instead, he pulled out a worn captain's armband. The blue cloth had faded almost gray. An old crest was stitched in the center, and 2 small letters had been sewn into the inside edge. JB Grandpa saw those letters and stopped breathing for a second. "Where did you get that?" he asked. Brandon walked toward us with the armband resting across his open palm. "It belonged to my grandfather, Robert Mercer," he said. "He wore it to every match until he died last winter." Grandpa leaned forward. "Robert Mercer, from East Harbor?" Brandon blinked. "Yes. Did you know him?" Before Grandpa could answer, Douglas stood. "Brandon, put that away. This has nothing to do with him." The boy looked at his father, and something changed in his expression. He was still frightened, but he had decided that being frightened was no longer a reason to remain silent. Grandpa said a real captain gives up his place before taking someone else's, Brandon said. By then, the conversations around us had stopped. People in the row above leaned closer. A woman near the railing lowered her phone and stared at Douglas. Brandon lifted the armband so everyone could see it. "You said this gentleman would not remember today?" He continued. But Grandpa remembered every match he attended. He remembered the people who were kind to him, too. I think he would be ashamed of what we did. Douglas's confident expression disappeared. "That is enough." "Dad, it isn't." Brandon turned to my grandfather and held out the armband. "My father doesn't deserve to carry this today." "I think you do." Grandpa stared at the worn fabric. His hands began shaking again, but this time it had nothing to do with his age. He touched the stitched initials. "JB does not stand for junior boys," he whispered. Brandon frowned. "What does it mean?" Grandpa looked at him. It stands for Jeremy Bennett. This was mine before it belonged to your grandfather. The entire section became silent. Even Douglas had nothing to say. Grandpa explained that he and Robert had played together on an amateur team in East Harbor in the early 1950s. The team had almost no money. Grandma June had made their first armband from the sleeve of an old blue work shirt and stitched Grandpa's initials inside it. Grandpa had been captain for 2 seasons. Then, during an important local final, he injured his ankle. Robert carried him from the field and refused to let the team continue until someone found a doctor. Grandpa missed the rest of the season. Before the next match, he placed the armband around Robert's arm. "He told me it was mine," Grandpa said. "I told him a captain is not the man who keeps the title. A captain is the man who notices when someone else needs help." Brandon looked down at the armband as though it had become something entirely new. Douglas shook his head. "My father never mentioned you." There was accusation in his voice, as if Grandpa had invented the memory to embarrass him. Brandon suddenly turned back toward his backpack, wet. He knelt on the concrete and opened the larger compartment. Inside were several old programs, a small photograph album, and a sealed yellow envelope. "I brought these because Grandpa wanted his things to attend the final," he said. "I found an envelope with the armband, but I never opened it." He removed the envelope. Across the front, in faded handwriting, were the words for Jeremy Bennett if Brandon ever finds him. I felt a chill move through me. Grandpa stared at the handwriting. "That's Robert's," he said. Douglas took one step forward. "Give me that." Brandon moved the envelope out of his reach. "It is addressed to him." The steward I had tried to call finally arrived. Her name was Maya Ruiz, according to her badge. 2 security employees followed her because someone had reported a dispute in the accessible section. Douglas immediately lifted his gold credential. "This is a private family matter. I am here on behalf of North Star Financial. Everything is under control." Maya did not look impressed. "Sir, these guests have tickets for the accessible platform. Do you?" Douglas pointed to the row behind him. "Our seats are there. We agreed to exchange?" "No," I said. "We did not." Amaya asked to see everyone's tickets. I opened mine on my phone. Douglas displayed 3 seats in the row above. They were excellent seats, but they were not on the accessible platform. "You need to return to the locations on your ticket," Maya said. Douglas lowered his voice. "Do you know how much my company gives this club? I know exactly how much this gentleman paid for the right to use the seat you took. Please move." A woman behind us stood. All heard what he said to the old gentleman. Another supporter raised his hand. "So did I." Then someone across the aisle said, "I recorded part of it." Douglas looked around and finally understood that his sponsor badge could not erase a section full of witnesses. Maya asked one security employee to escort Douglas and Elaine to their proper seats. Then she turned to Brandon. "You need to go with your parents unless they give permission for you to remain here." For the first time, Elaine spoke. "He can stay." Douglas stared at his wife. She looked directly at him now. "He should stay," she repeated. "Maybe we should both think about why he would rather sit with strangers." Douglas opened his mouth, but the people around him were still watching. He turned and walked toward the row above without another word. I expected Grandpa to reclaim his original place. Instead, he looked at Brandon, who still held the unopened envelope. "We should read that somewhere quieter," Grandpa said. Maya heard him. She asked us to wait and spoke into her radio. A few minutes later, she returned with surprising news. The club had a small family lounge beside the tunnel. It was meant for guests who needed a quiet place away from the crowd. She could take us there before kickoff and then move us to an even better accessible location near midfield. All three of us, I asked. She looked at Brandon. All three. His mother approved it. As we left, people in the section stood and applauded Grandpa. He raised one hand, embarrassed by the attention. Douglas remained in his assigned row. His expensive jacket and gold credential were still visible, but the symbols that had made him feel powerful now looked painfully small. Inside the family lounge, the noise of the stadium became a low vibration beneath the floor. Grandpa sat on a couch. Brandon placed the envelope in his hands. "Would you like me to open it for you?" I asked. Grandpa nodded. I carefully broke the old seal and unfolded 3 handwritten pages. The letter had been written 5 years earlier. Robert explained that he had spent years trying to locate Grandpa but had only an old address. His wife had died. His health was declining. He wanted Brandon to know where the armband came from and why he had kept it. One paragraph made my voice break. Robert had written, "Jeremy, you gave me your place when losing it hurt you most. I built my life around the lesson you gave me that day. I tried to teach my son Douglas, but somewhere along the way, he began to believe that success meant entering every room first. I hope Brandon learns the better meaning of winning." Brandon covered his mouth. Grandpa closed his eyes. The mystery of the armband had been solved, but it created a more painful question. How could Douglas carry his father's history into the stadium and still act against everything it represented? The answer came from Brandon. "Dad never read the letter," he said. "Grandpa left the box to me. Dad said it was just old sports junk." Grandpa reached for Brandon's hand. "Your grandfather did not leave you junk. He left you instructions." Brandon nodded as tears filled his eyes. Then Maya returned with a tall woman in a blue club blazer. She introduced herself as Evelyn Shaw, Harbor City's Director of Community Relations. Evelyn had heard enough over the radio to understand the seat dispute, but she wanted to confirm the details because Douglas was not merely a sponsor's guest. He was scheduled to walk onto the field at halftime and accept the club's Community Leadership Award on behalf of North Star Financial. I almost laughed at the bitter irony. The award recognized North Star's support for programs serving elderly fans and children from low-income neighborhoods. Douglas had been selected as the company representative because he chaired its community committee. The man who had told a 92-year-old supporter that his memories did not matter was about to receive an award for serving the community. Evelyn asked whether we were willing to describe exactly what had happened. I told her everything. Maya confirmed the ticket numbers. 2 witnesses had already offered video. Evelyn did not make an immediate promise. "I need to review this with stadium management and North Star's senior representative," she said. "But I can assure you that no sponsor has authority to remove a ticket holder from an accessible seat." Grandpa surprised all of us. "Please do not punish the boy," he said. Evelyn looked at Brandon. "We have no reason to. And do not humiliate his father simply for entertainment," Grandpa continued. "Correct him. There is a difference." That was Grandpa. Even after Douglas had humiliated him, he did not want a public spectacle created merely for revenge. He wanted justice to teach something. Evelyn promised to remember that. She led us to 3 seats near midfield. The accessible platform was so close that we could hear players calling to one another during warm-ups. Grandpa sat between Brandon and me. When the opening whistle sounded, 20 years disappeared from his face. He leaned forward, studied every pass, and quietly predicted where the ball would go next. Brandon smiled each time Grandpa criticized the formation. "You sound exactly like my grandfather," he said. Then Robert was usually correct. By the 20th minute, they were discussing tactics as if they had known each other for years. I looked toward Douglas's row. He was watching us instead of the match. At first, Anger remained on his face. Then he saw Brandon laugh at something Grandpa said. The anger slowly changed into something else. It looked like loss. Douglas had stolen a better view of the field, but his behavior had cost him the chance to share the match with his son. Near the end of the first half, the game remained scoreless. The tension inside the stadium grew with every missed chance. Then Evelyn appeared at the entrance to our platform. She bent beside Grandpa. "Mr. Bennett, may I speak with you privately?" We moved a few feet away while Brandon stayed in his seat. Evelyn explained that the club and North Star had reviewed the recordings. Douglas would not receive the Community Leadership Award. His company had removed him as its representative before the ceremony. He had also lost his sponsor access for the rest of the season. After the match, the company would conduct its own review of his position on the community committee. "Who will accept the award?" I asked. Evelyn smiled. North Star's chief executive suggested that perhaps we should not give it to an executive at all. We would like Mr. Bennett and Brandon to come onto the field together. The award will be redirected to Harbor City's new Accessible Fan Fund, and they can present the first donation in memory of Robert Mercer and June Bennett. I stared at her. The Accessible Fan Fund would help elderly and disabled supporters attend matches with a companion. It was exactly the kind of assistance Grandpa had needed. "I am not a community leader," Grandpa protested when I told him. Evelyn nodded toward Brandon. "You led one person today. Sometimes that is where a community begins." A Grandpa agreed on one condition. The boy carries the armband. At halftime, a staff member pushed Grandpa's wheelchair through the tunnel. I walked beside him while Brandon followed, holding the faded fabric against his chest. More than 60,000 people filled the stadium. When the announcer told the short version of what had happened, a photograph of Grandpa and Robert's armband appeared on the large screen. The crowd rose. The sound was so powerful that I felt it inside my ribs. Grandpa looked terrified by the attention. I placed Grandma's photograph in his hand, and his expression softened. "She always said I would become important when I was too old to enjoy it," he whispered. Brandon laughed through his tears. Evelyn handed him the ceremonial check for the Accessible Fan Fund. Then Grandpa carefully placed Robert's old armband around Brandon's sleeve. "A captain does not take the best place," Grandpa said into the stadium microphone. "A captain makes sure someone else has one." The crowd answered with another wave of applause. On the large screen, the camera briefly showed Douglas in his assigned row. He was no longer wearing the gold credential. He did not look angry. He looked exposed. Not because the crowd hated him, but because his own son's courage had revealed the distance between the man he claimed to be and the man he had become. Brandon saw his father on the screen. He did not smile or celebrate his embarrassment. He simply placed one hand over the armband. That quiet gesture seemed to hurt Douglas more than any insult could have. When we returned to our seats, the second half began badly. Harbor City controlled the ball, but could not score. In the 78th minute, the opposing team broke forward and found the net. The entire stadium groaned. Grandpa sat back. For the first time all afternoon, he looked tired. I checked his face and asked whether he needed to leave. "Leave," he said. "They have not blown the final whistle." He lifted his faded scarf. "There is still time," people around us repeated the words. Soon, an entire section was chanting them. There is still time. With 2 minutes remaining, Harbor City won a corner. The ball curved into the penalty area, struck one player's shoulder, and fell in front of our midfielder. He shot. The net moved. Goal. The stadium erupted. Grandpa rose halfway from his seat, waving his scarf while I held his arm. Brandon shouted so loudly that his voice cracked. 1-1. Then the fourth official signaled 5 minutes of added time. Grandpa looked at me. 5 minutes is a lifetime if you use it well. Deep into the final minute, Harbor City's youngest player stole the ball near midfield. He passed to the right wing and continued running. The return pass split 2 defenders. 1 touch, 1 shot. For half a second, the whole world seemed silent. Then the ball struck the inside of the post and crossed the line. Grandpa jumped. He actually jumped. I caught him around the waist as he laughed and cried at the same time. Blue scarves flew into the air. Strangers embraced one another. Brandon wrapped both arms around Grandpa. "You saw that." "June!" Grandpa shouted toward the open sky. "We finally made it!" The final whistle sounded moments later. Harbor City were champions. Grandpa remained standing with my help. He held Grandma's photograph toward the field while tears moved freely down his face. Then he looked at Brandon's sleeve and straightened the old captain's armband. "Your grandfather carried that with honor," he said. "You did the same today?" Brandon looked toward the row behind us. Douglas was standing at the aisle. He waited until the celebration calmed, and then approached without his sponsor credential. Elaine walked beside him, but she stayed several steps back. I moved between him and Grandpa. "If you are here to argue, this is not the time." Douglas shook his head. "I am not." He looked at his son first. "Brandon, I embarrassed you. I also embarrassed your grandfather's memory. I kept telling you that successful people take opportunities before someone else does. Today, you showed me what he had actually tried to teach us." Brandon did not rush to forgive him. "You did not listen when I asked you to stop. I know. And you only apologized after you lost the award." Douglas lowered his eyes. "That is also true?" Then he faced Grandpa. "Mr. Bennett, what I said about your memory was cruel. Taking your seat was worse. I cannot undo either thing. I am sorry." Grandpa studied him for a long moment. "An apology is a promise about tomorrow," he said. "Do not ask us to trust the words tonight. Show your son what they mean tomorrow." Douglas nodded. Then he looked at the armband. "Brandon, may I hold it?" Brandon considered the question carefully. "Not today, Dad. You have not earned it yet." The answer visibly hurt Douglas, but for once, he did not argue. "Fair enough," he said. Grandpa leaned toward Brandon after his parents walked a short distance away. That took courage. "It felt awful," Brandon admitted. "Most courage does, son. If it felt easy, everyone would use it." We waited while the crowd slowly filed out. An empty paper cup lay near Grandpa's wheelchair. He reached down, picked it up, and handed it to me. "Trash can on the way." I laughed through my tears. "You are 92 years old, your heart is failing, and you are still cleaning the stadium." He smiled. A real fan leaves the game better than he found it." Brandon bent down and collected 2 more cups. That might sound like the end of the story, but the most surprising part happened afterward. The next morning, North Star Financial released a short public statement. It did not name Grandpa or repeat the cruel words. It simply apologized for the behavior of its representative, confirmed that Douglas had stepped down from the community committee, and doubled its donation to the Accessible Fan Fund. Douglas was not fired. Grandpa was glad about that. Destroying a man is not the same as teaching him, he told me. Instead, Douglas lost the position that had allowed him to confuse status with character. North Star required him to spend the rest of the season working with the employees who arranged transportation and seating for elderly supporters. At first, I suspected it was only a public relations performance. Then, 3 weeks later, I received a photograph from Brandon. Douglas was wearing a volunteer shirt and pushing an elderly fan's wheelchair toward the accessible entrance. There was no camera crew around him. According to Brandon, His father had arrived early and stayed after everyone else had gone. The message below the photograph said, "He still has a long way to go, but this is tomorrow." A grandpa read it twice. "Good," he said. "Tomorrow is where apologies live." The club framed Robert's letter and made a copy for both families. The original armband remained with Brandon. He visited Grandpa every few weeks, usually on Saturdays. They watched Harbor City together from the two old recliners in Grandpa's living room. For the first time since Grandma died, someone regularly sat in the empty chair. Brandon never tried to replace her. He did not need to. He simply brought a new voice into a room that had been quiet for too long. Sometimes Douglas drove him. At first, he waited in the car. Later, Grandpa invited him inside. Forgiveness did not arrive in one dramatic moment. It came slowly through small acts that were repeated when nobody was applauding. Douglas listened more than he spoke. He learned how to make Grandpa's tea. He repaired the loose wheel on the old recliner. One rainy Saturday, he admitted that he had spent most of his adult life trying to prove he was more successful than his father. "I thought kindness made him weak," Douglas said. "Now I understand that he was strong enough not to need everyone to know he was important." A grandpa answered, "Then stop trying to be more impressive than him. Try to be worthy of him." By the end of the year, the Accessible Fan Fund had helped more than 200 elderly and disabled supporters attend matches with someone they loved. The club named its volunteer award after Robert Mercer and Jeremy Bennett. Grandpa pretended the attention embarrassed him, but he kept the framed certificate beside Grandma's photograph. His health declined that winter. There were hospital visits, difficult nights, and mornings when he could no longer reach the recliner without help. Still, he remembered every detail of the championship final. He remembered the late goal. He remembered the crowd chanting. He remembered Brandon standing with the armband on his sleeve. Most of all, he remembered the sentence Douglas believed he would forget. "He probably won't even remember tomorrow." A grandpa repeated it once and smiled. "Poor man?" he said. He did not understand that memories are not measured by how many tomorrows you have. They are measured by how much love you carry into them. Grandpa passed away peacefully the following spring, 11 months after the match. At his funeral, Brandon stood beside me wearing the faded armband. Douglas stood behind his son, holding Grandpa's blue scarf with both hands. Before the service ended, Brandon placed a folded note beside Grandpa's photograph. I read it later with his permission. It said, "You gave me a place when my own father took yours. I promised to make room for someone else." That is the story of how an entitled man stole the seats I had bought for my 92-year-old grandfather and believed age made Grandpa's dream less valuable. It is also the story of how a frightened teenage boy opened a faded backpack, uncovered a connection between two old friends, and chose character over comfort in front of an entire stadium. In the end, justice did not come from cruelty. Douglas lost the award, the special access, and the respected position he had not lived up to. But he was also given the chance to understand what those honors were supposed to mean. Brandon kept his grandfather's legacy. The Accessible Fan Fund gave hundreds of other families the experience Grandpa almost lost. And Grandpa finally attended the championship match he and Grandma had dreamed about for a lifetime. The lesson I learned is simple. Respect is not something we owe only to people who can reward us. Age never makes a person's dream less important. Courage can come from the youngest person in the room, and real leadership is not claiming the best seat, the loudest title, or the brightest spotlight. It is noticing who has been pushed aside and making sure that person has a place. Thank you for watching and listening to Grandpa's story. Please like this video and leave a comment. tell me where you are listening from and tell me what you would have done if you had been standing in that stadium section. The man who said Grandpa would forget the match was wrong. Grandpa remembered it until his final day. Brandon carried its lesson into tomorrow, and the rest of us learned never to stop believing until the final whistle